I reheated a pot of vegetable soup on the stove and glanced at the clock on the microwave. It was 6:30 in the evening. In an hour, I was supposed to go to my grandson's for dinner, but I wasn't in a hurry. At 74, I had long since learned one simple truth. People only value what they have to wait for. My apartment on the second floor of a small building in Midtown had been my fortress for 18 years. After Frank died, I could have moved to a more prestigious neighborhood. I had the money, but why? Everything was close at hand here. The Mexican shop on the corner, where the salesman Juan always put aside the best avocados for me. The laundromat, where they knew that my laundry had to be starched in a special way. Mrs. Lopez's hair salon, where I got my hair cut every 3 weeks. The phone rang as I was pouring water into a glass. The name Tiffany appeared on the screen. Grandma Deb, are you still coming today? My daughter-in-law's voice sounded slightly annoyed. Of course I'm coming. At 8, as agreed. Can you come earlier? Ryan bought some wine, and I want to open it. I smiled. Ryan bought the wine with my money. The monthly card I had set up for him 3 years ago was used for all purchases, from groceries to entertainment. I'll be there at 8, Tiffany. I still have things to do. Okay, see you then. I didn't have anything to do, but I wasn't used to showing up at the first call. Frank always said that if you're too available, people will stop appreciating you. 46 years of marriage taught me a lot, especially how to read between the lines. I went into the bedroom and opened the closet. Dresses, blouses, and jackets hung on hangers, all neat and tidy, each in its place. I chose a dark blue jacket and gray pants. Nothing bright, nothing flashy. I had long since figured out my place in Ryan's family, a helpful but not overly conspicuous grandmother who helps out with money and doesn't ask unnecessary questions. Ryan married Tiffany 4 years ago. The wedding cost me $40,000, but I didn't regret it. My grandson was the only one I had left after my son's death. David died in a car accident when Ryan was 16. Since then, I have been a mother, a father, and a part-time ATM to the boy. Tiffany appeared in his life suddenly, a tall blonde with bright makeup and a habit of talking very fast. She worked in a beauty salon and dreamed of opening her own business. Ryan glowed with happiness next to her, and I remained silent, although something inside me told me that this marriage would cost me dearly. I was right. First, they asked for help with the down payment on a house. Then it turned out that Ryan's salary at the car service wasn't enough to cover the mortgage payments. I took on the bulk of it, $2,500 a month, plus an expense card, plus help with utility bills. It added up to about $4,000 a month. I grabbed my purse and car keys. The 30-year-old Camry served us well, even though Ryan constantly suggested buying something more modern. For what? To impress the neighbors? At my age, reliability is more important than prestige. On the way, I thought about what tonight would be like. Tiffany would surely tell me about the new handbag she saw in the boutique. Ryan would complain about work and hint that it was time to look for something more lucrative. They would discuss plans for the weekend, maybe a trip to the ocean or a visit to an expensive restaurant. And as always, they would talk about money as if they earned it themselves. I wasn't a naive woman. At 74, I understood that I was buying their attention and care. But what else could I do? Loneliness in an empty apartment? Or at least the illusion of family warmth for a certain price? The car turned onto their street. The houses here were close together, but each had its own small lawn and driveway. Ryan had palm trees growing in his yard that cost more than my car. I parked and looked at the lit windows of the house. Inside, another dose of polite indifference awaited me, seasoned with requests for help. But today was different. Maybe it was the fatigue that had built up over the years, or maybe Tiffany's call demanding that I come early was the last straw. I felt a strange calm, as if I were preparing for something important. The house on Maple Street greeted me with a familiar sight: a neat lawn watered by a 300 a month automatic irrigation system, two palm trees on either side of the entrance, each costing $1,500, and a natural stone driveway that cost another $2,500 to lay. I remembered every purchase, every receipt, because it was my money that had turned an ordinary house into a little piece of paradise. Parking at the curb, I lingered in the car for a moment, looking at the two-story building with white walls and a red tile roof. The house was beautiful, no doubt about it. The architect had done a good job, creating something between Spanish style and modern minimalism. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a spacious kitchen living room, and a backyard with a pool. For a young family, it was the perfect start to adult life. For me, it was a reminder that I was buying a place in someone else's life. When Ryan first brought me here 4 years ago, the house was empty. The previous owners had left only the built-in furniture and an old refrigerator. The walls were painted a dull beige, the floors were covered with cheap laminate, and the garden had only two scrawny bushes. At the time, Tiffany walked around the rooms with a notebook, jotting down her ideas for renovations, while Ryan nodded and promised that everything would be just as she wanted. The only problem was money. The down payment had eaten up all their savings, and there was nothing left for renovations and furnishings. That's when they asked me for help. Not directly, of course, through hints, complaints about life, and stories about how important it was to create a cozy home for their future children. I gave in to these conversations and opened my wallet. 20,000 for renovating the living room and kitchen, 15 for new furniture, 8,000 for landscaping, 6,000 for a swimming pool and filtration system. The amounts added up one after another, and I continued to pay, hoping that each new purchase would bring me closer to my grandson and his wife. Now, looking at the result, I understood. The house was beautiful, but it felt foreign. I was a guest here, and not a very welcome one at that. The solid mahogany front door, another purchase of mine for $1,500, opened as I climbed the steps. Tiffany appeared on the threshold in a housecoat that cost more than my monthly clothing budget. An ivory silk robe embroidered with gold thread, low-heeled sandals, and a manicure done at the most expensive salon in the neighborhood. Grandma Deb, finally. She kissed me lightly on the cheek without touching my skin with her lips. We thought you'd changed your mind about coming. I said I'd be here at 8. It's now 10 to 8. Yes, but time drags when you're waiting. Tiffany led me into the house, her heels clicking on the marble floor of the hallway. That floor was also my idea. Or rather, the result of repeated hints about how inappropriate it was to welcome guests on old linoleum. The living room was still impressive even now, 4 years after the renovation. An Italian leather sofa, an expensive wooden coffee table, a wall-to-wall plasma TV, a Persian rug, and designer lamps created an atmosphere of luxury that I couldn't afford at their age. But now it was their everyday life, their norm, which they took for granted. Ryan's in the shower. He'll be down in a minute. Tiffany sat me down in the armchair I had once chosen in the store, thinking it would be my favorite place in the house. Would you like some wine? We have a special occasion today. What kind of occasion? I won't tell you until Ryan gets here. But you'll like it, I promise. I accepted a glass of red wine and took a small sip. Judging by the taste, it was an expensive wine, probably from the collection Ryan had been building on my extra card. Each bottle cost $100 or more. But how could you skimp on the good things in life? That's how my grandson explained his purchases when I accidentally saw his credit card statement. Tiffany sat across from me, elegantly crossing her legs. At 27, she was a truly beautiful woman. Long blonde hair, regular features, a slim figure maintained by a personal trainer 3 times a week. Another expense that I paid for through a monthly transfer to their joint account. The trainer cost $200 per session, but health is more important than money, isn't it? How's work? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Tiffany worked as an administrator at her friend's beauty salon and earned minimum wage plus tips. That money was barely enough for gas and cosmetics. Everything's fine, but I'm thinking about changing jobs. This salon doesn't offer any opportunities for growth, she said, twirling a glass in her hands, admiring the play of light in the red wine. I'd like to do something more creative, more promising. Creative and promising usually meant expensive and unprofitable. In 4 years of marriage, Tiffany had tried her hand at selling cosmetics online, making handmade jewelry, and photographing pets. Each new hobby required startup capital, which I dutifully provided. The result was predictable. After a few months, her enthusiasm waned, and the equipment gathered dust in the garage. What exactly do you mean? It's too early to say, but I have an idea. Tiffany's mysterious smile did not bode well for my bank account. I'll tell you when Ryan comes down. Heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs. My grandson appeared in the living room, still damp from his shower, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. At 31, Ryan had retained his athletic build, although working in a car repair shop required more endurance than strength. Dark hair, brown eyes, square jaw. He looked like his father at the same age. Sometimes, when I looked at him, I saw David, and my heart ached with the pain of loss. Grandma. He bent down and hugged me tightly. Unlike his wife, Ryan was not afraid of physical contact. How are you? How's your health? Everything's fine. How's work? Same as usual. Lots of cars, not much money. He plopped down on the sofa next to his wife and reached for a bottle of wine. Old Morgan cut the bonus again. He says it's an economic crisis and we need to tighten our belts. The economic crisis didn't stop him from buying new furniture every 6 months and changing cars every 2 years. The last car, a red convertible worth $40,000, was registered in my name because Ryan didn't have enough credit history for such a loan. Formally, the car belonged to me, but the keys were in my grandson's pocket. Maybe you should look for another job, I suggested, knowing that we had already had this conversation dozens of times. I've looked, but it's the same everywhere. Either the salary is even lower or the conditions are worse. At least the team here is normal. Ryan took a sip of wine and looked at his wife meaningfully. By the way, we have news. I braced myself for the worst. News in this family usually cost money. We've decided to start our own business. Tiffany couldn't hold back and blurted it out. Can you imagine? Our own beauty salon? A beauty salon. One of the riskiest types of business, where competition is fierce and profits come after years of hard work, if they come at all. That's a serious decision, I said cautiously. Have you studied the market? Have you drawn up a business plan? Of course. Ryan took out his tablet and started showing me some tables. We found a great space in a shopping center, good foot traffic, convenient parking. The rent is only $3,000 a month, only $3,000, plus a deposit, plus renovations, plus equipment, plus employee salaries, plus advertising, plus 1,000 other expenses they hadn't even thought about. What about startup capital? I asked, even though the answer was obvious. Well, there are certain complications there. Tiffany fiddled with the hem of her robe. Banks give loans at high interest rates, and we need time for the business to pay for itself. How much money do you need? 80,000, Ryan said quickly. That's with a reserve for the first 6 months of operation. $80,000, almost a quarter of my savings. Money that Frank had saved his whole life, denying himself small pleasures. That's a lot of money. I put my glass down on the table. I need to think about it. What is there to think about? Tiffany leaned forward, a note of irritation in her voice. It's an investment. We're not asking. We're offering you the chance to invest in a promising venture. What guarantee do we have of a return? Grandma, we're family. Ryan took my hand in his. Do you need guarantees between family members? You know we'll never let you down. Family, family. Beautiful words that hid a simple desire to get money without any obligations. I saw them exchange glances, saw Tiffany bite her lip with impatience. For them, this conversation was a formality. They had already spent the money in their dreams. Okay, I said, but first, show me a detailed business plan with calculations, forecasts, competitor analysis. If everything looks serious, I'll think about it. The couple's faces lengthened slightly. Obviously, they had hoped for a quicker decision. Of course, Ryan hurried to say. We'll prepare everything. We'll consult with experts and draw up a professional plan. Consulting with experts also cost money, but they hadn't thought about that yet. In their world, money appeared on its own. All they had to do was ask their grandmother. In the meantime, let's have dinner, Tiffany suggested, getting up from the sofa. I made your favorite, baked chicken with vegetables. We went to the dining room, where the table was set for three. The beautiful tableware I had bought for their wedding, candles in silver candlesticks, a gift from last Christmas, and a bouquet of roses in a crystal vase that they had inherited from my mother. Everything in this house reminded me of my involvement in their lives, but the owners themselves preferred not to think about it. Dinner proceeded as usual. Tiffany talked about her friends, their shopping, and their travels. Ryan complained about his boss and colleagues. I listened, nodded, and occasionally asked questions. We played at being a family, but everyone was thinking about their own things. They were thinking about the $80,000 that would solve all their problems. I was thinking about how, once again, I was being asked to finance someone else's dream. The chicken was dry, the vegetables were overcooked, and the sauce was too salty. Tiffany had never been known for her culinary talents, but I obediently ate, pretending that everything was delicious. Over the years of family dinners, I had learned to praise even the most unsuccessful dishes because any criticism was taken with hostility. It was better to remain silent and keep the peace at the table than to argue over oversalted sauce. You know, Grandma, Tiffany cut off a tiny piece of chicken and gracefully put it in her mouth. Have you thought about moving? At your age, living alone in a two-story house is somehow unsafe. I choked on my wine. My house was one story, and Tiffany knew that very well. But for some reason, when she said it, it turned into some kind of dilapidated structure where an elderly woman risked breaking her neck at every turn. My house is one story, and I'm doing just fine. Well, yes, of course. She waved her fork in the air, but still, so many rooms, such a big yard. What if something happens? What if you get sick or fall? I have a phone and neighbors nearby. Neighbors are good, but they're not obligated to look after you, Ryan interjected, looking up from his plate. Tiffany and I talk about this a lot. We worry about you. They worry. How touching, especially considering that they call me once a week at best, and then only for business. They only remember my health, mood, or plans when they need money or want something. What do you suggest? I asked, although I had a pretty good idea where this was going. There are great retirement homes. Tiffany leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with excitement. With all the amenities, medical care, entertainment programs, you won't be alone there. You'll find friends your own age. Nursing homes, places where those who have become a burden to their families live out their lives. I've seen these places. Even the most expensive ones are more like hospitals than homes. Sterile corridors, the smell of medicine, old people in wheelchairs staring at one spot, waiting to die. I'm 74, not 94. I'm not ready for a nursing home yet. We're not talking about a nursing home. Ryan quickly corrected himself. There are modern residences that are very comfortable, like five-star hotels. And do you know how much money they'll save? That's the real reason for their concern, the savings. By selling my house, they'll get a decent amount of money, which will be enough not only for a beauty salon, but also for a comfortable life for years to come. Savings on what? Well, think about it yourself. Tiffany began to bend her fingers. Utility bills, property taxes, yard maintenance, repairs. That's a lot of money every month. And in the residence, everything is included in one price. And how much do such residences cost? It varies, Ryan replied evasively. But the main thing is not the price, but comfort and safety. I knew the prices for such establishments, from $3,000 to $8,000 a month, depending on the level. For that money, I could live at home and still help my family. But they wanted my house, not monthly payments. Where will I entertain guests? I asked. Where will I cook holiday dinners? Why would you need to cook? Tiffany laughed as if I had said something ridiculous. There are restaurants and cafes in the residence, professional chefs, varied menus, no fuss in the kitchen. Fuss in the kitchen. That's what she called what had been my joy all my life. Cooking for my family, caring for my loved ones, creating comfort with my own hands. For her, it was just a hassle that an elderly person needed to be relieved of. What about my things? The furniture that my grandfather and I collected over the years, the photographs, the books. Well, you can take some things with you, Ryan shrugged. But the rest? Well, you can't hoard junk your whole life. It's time to let go of the past. Junk. My life, my memories, the furniture Frank made with his own hands. To them, it was all just junk that needed to be gotten rid of. The dress I wore when I got married, my son's childhood photos, his school drawings, junk. The books my husband and I read together in the evenings, his favorite chair where he fell asleep watching TV, junk. I'm not ready for such changes yet, I said as calmly as possible. Grandma, you can't live in the past forever. Tiffany leaned back in her chair. You need to think about the future, about practicality. My future is my concern. Of course, of course. Ryan hastened to smooth things over. We just want you to be happy and safe. Happy and safe. And at the same time, to vacate the house that was worth $500,000. How convenient that their concern for my well-being coincided with their financial needs. Speaking of safety, Tiffany poured herself more wine. Did you know there's been a spate of burglaries in your neighborhood? I read about it in the local news. It's mostly lonely elderly people who are being robbed. The news about burglaries in my neighborhood was greatly exaggerated. Yes, there were occasional petty thefts from cars, but there hadn't been any serious crimes in several years. But Tiffany always knew how to present information in the right light. I have a good alarm system, and my neighbors are attentive. An alarm is good, but what if armed robbers break into the house? She lowered her voice to a dramatic whisper. What then? You can't run away or hide. Armed robbers in the quiet neighborhood of Mid-City. Tiffany had clearly been watching too many crime shows. But Ryan nodded, supporting his wife in her fears for my safety. The residence has security 24/7, he added. Cameras, a pass system. It's really safe there. And medical staff, Tiffany chimed in. If anything happens, a doctor will be nearby. What if you fall and break your leg at home? How long will you lie there before someone finds you? They painted a grim picture of my lonely future. Theft, falls, illness, death in complete solitude. All so that I would voluntarily give up my home and move to a place they considered suitable for an elderly relative. Listen, I put my fork down on my plate. I understand that you are concerned about me, but the decision about where and how I live is mine alone. Of course, Tiffany smiled. but the smile did not reach her eyes. We're not forcing you. We're just expressing our opinion. And another thing, I looked at them in turn. My house is not for sale, at least not in the next few years. An awkward silence hung in the air. Ryan and Tiffany exchanged glances, and I saw disappointment in their eyes. Their plans to sell my property had fallen through, which meant they would have to find another way to finance the beauty salon. But you'll consider our business proposal, right? Ryan asked after a pause. If you present a serious business plan, then yes, I'll consider it. What do you mean by serious? Tiffany's tone became slightly sharper. Market analysis, financial forecasts, risk assessment, the documents that a bank usually requires to issue a loan. A bank is one thing, but family is another, she objected. There's no need for such bureaucracy between family members. Family members. Those words again. But when it came to money, for some reason, family ties didn't prevent them from treating me like a bank, with demands, but without accountability. It's precisely because we're family that everything has to be fair, I replied. If the business is really promising, then a business plan will only help avoid mistakes. You know what? Tiffany pushed her plate away sharply. Sometimes I feel like you just don't trust us. Trust and caution are two different things. Yeah, sure. We're strangers to you, trying to cheat a poor old lady, Tiffany said, her voice sounding hurt, but clearly feigned. I didn't say that. But you implied it? You're asking for documents as if we were some kind of frauds. Ryan put his hand on his wife's shoulder, trying to calm her down, but he looked just as upset. Apparently, they had expected an easier victory. Tiff, don't be nervous, he said. Grandma's right. We need a proper plan. I thought family meant trusting each other. Tiffany sniffed and took a handkerchief out of her purse. I guess I was wrong. Tears on demand, a tried and tested female tactic that usually worked flawlessly on men. Ryan became concerned, began stroking his wife's hand, and gave me reproachful looks, as if to say, "You've reduced a woman to tears with your suspicions." Tiffany, I'm not accusing anyone. I tried to smooth things over. I just want to understand what I'm investing my money in. Exactly, investing. She raised her head, and I saw that there were no tears. As if you're doing us a favor, and I thought you wanted to help. What's the difference? When you help, you don't ask for references and documents. Help comes from the heart, not the mind. From the heart. Beautiful words. But my heart had been deceived many times before, and now I preferred to rely on my mind. Too much money had been spent on heartfelt impulses that brought nothing but disappointment. Okay, I said, then help me understand. Why a beauty salon? Why now? And why 80,000? Because we have experience. Tiffany perked up. I've been working in this field for 4 years. I know all the ins and outs of the business. 4 years as an administrator is experience? Doubtful. But I kept quiet. And 80,000 is a realistic estimate, Ryan chimed in. We consulted with experts. What experts? Well, people who know about this stuff. Friends, acquaintances. Friends and acquaintances. Not the most reliable consultants for serious business. But again, I decided not to comment. Dinner ended in a tense atmosphere. Tiffany feigned offended innocence. Ryan tried to be the peacemaker, and I wondered how quickly a family evening had turned into business negotiations. We drank coffee, discussed the weather and plans for the weekend. But we were all thinking about the $80,000 that hung in the air as an unresolved issue. The coffee was strong and bitter, like the atmosphere at the table. I slowly stirred my spoon, watching the sugar dissolve, and listened to Ryan talk about his plans for the weekend. They were going to a barbecue at a friend's house, then to the mall to buy new bedroom furniture. The usual activities of a typical young family, living off the money of an elderly relative. "What are you doing this weekend, Grandma?" Tiffany asked, clearly trying to lighten the mood after the awkward conversation about business. "Cleaning the house, maybe going to church," I replied. "Nothing special." "Church?" She raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Why? You're not very religious." The question sounded as if going to church was some strange whim of old people that young people couldn't understand. In fact, I wasn't particularly religious, but church gave me something I lacked at home: a sense of community, peace, a place where you are accepted for who you are, without judging your bank account. "I feel calm there," I said simply. "I see." Tiffany nodded with the look of someone who had understood something important about the psychology of older people. "At your age, many people start thinking about the soul. At my age." She said it as if I already had one foot in the grave. At 74, I felt quite spry and clear-headed, but to them, I was just an old woman living out the rest of her life and preparing to meet her maker. "Maybe you'll meet someone there?" Ryan interjected, and I detected a note of hope in his voice. "Men your age go to church, too. Men my age. Widowers looking for a caregiver, or lonely old men who needed a housekeeper. My grandson clearly didn't see any romance in the relationships of 70-year-olds. "I'm not looking for a relationship," I replied. "I'm fine on my own." "But loneliness is no life." Tiffany shook her head. "A person shouldn't be alone, especially in old age, especially in old age." Again, this obsessive theme of my old age. It was as if they were deliberately emphasizing with every sentence that I was no longer young, no longer independent, and needed care and attention. And who else but a loving family should provide that care? "You know what I'm thinking?" Tiffany put down her cup and leaned on the table. "Maybe you should get a dog, a small one, an indoor dog, for company." "I'm allergic to fur," I reminded her, even though we had discussed this many times before. "Oh, right." She slapped her forehead. "Then a cat or a parrot. They say they're very smart. They can talk. A parrot for a lonely old lady. The classic set: church, pets, slowly fading away, surrounded by memories. Apparently, that's how they saw my future." "How about finding a hobby?" Ryan suggested. "Knitting or, what's it called? Macrame." Knitting and macrame. Another cliche about activities for older women. My grandson clearly didn't know what to do with a grandmother who didn't fit the standard mold of an old lady with balls of yarn. "I have things to do," I said. "The house, the garden, books." "Books are good," Tiffany agreed. "Just be careful not to ruin your eyesight. At your age, it's dangerous. At my age, everything is dangerous. Reading, walking, driving, living alone." According to their logic, I should sit in a chair, watch TV, and wait for the time to move into a nursing home. "What are you reading?" Ryan asked. "I'm rereading Dickens, David Copperfield." "Oh," Tiffany perked up. "That's a classic. I remember reading it in school. It was very boring." "Boring." Of course, for someone who only reads glossy magazines and social media posts, classic literature can seem boring. But I kept quiet. There was no point in offending my sister-in-law by criticizing her reading preferences. "Why reread it?" Ryan asked. "If you've already read it, you know how it ends." "Good books can be read several times, each time you discover something new." "Well, yes, probably," he shrugged. "I don't have time to read. Work, things to do, things to do." Of course, a 31-year-old man has a lot of things to do. 8 hours a day at the auto repair shop, then home, TV, computer. There's really no time left for reading, but there is time to plan how to spend Grandma's money. "Speaking of things," Tiffany glanced playfully at her husband, "we didn't tell Grandma about last night." What happened yesterday? I asked, although I could tell from their faces that nothing good awaited me. We had dinner with Chelsea and Brad, Tiffany began. You know they opened a restaurant last year? Well, their turnover is already over 1 million a year. 1 million a year. An impressive figure for the restaurant business. True, turnover and profit are two different things, but for Tiffany, it was the big numbers that mattered. And can you believe they started with only $100,000 in startup capital? She continued. And now they're thinking of opening a second restaurant, 100,000 against their 80. The hint was clear. Other people had achieved success with less investment, so why not give it a try? The restaurant business is very risky, I remarked. Most establishments close within the first 2 years. Well, that's if you do it half-heartedly, Ryan objected. But if you approach it wisely, study the market. Exactly, Tiffany chimed in. Chelsea said that the most important things are the right concept and a good location. We have both. They had a concept? That's the first I've heard of it. Until tonight, they only talked about wanting to open a beauty salon, but they didn't give any specific plans. What's your concept? The premium segment, Tiffany announced proudly. Elite services for wealthy clients, expensive but high quality. A premium segment in a shopping center with a rent of $3,000 a month. Wealthy clients usually go to salons that are located in more prestigious locations, but I decided to keep quiet about that too. And Brad said something else interesting. Ryan leaned closer, lowering his voice to a confidential tone. That family money is the cheapest money. No interest, no repayment terms, pure profit. Family money is the cheapest money. So that's how they perceived my help. Not as a sacrifice or care from a loved one, but as a profitable interest-free loan. Honest, at least. What else did Brad say? I asked, feeling a cold anger rising inside me. Well, various things about business. Tiffany waved her hand. And they also talked about their trip to Europe, 3 weeks in Italy and France. Can you imagine how beautiful it was? 3 weeks in Europe on money earned in a restaurant with $1 million turnover. Another hint at how successful their lives could be if their grandmother helped with the initial capital. And then there was the funniest story. Tiffany laughed and looked at her husband. Tell her about Chelsea's neighbor. What about the neighbor? Ryan also smiled, remembering something clearly amusing. Chelsea has a neighbor, an elderly woman in her 70s, Tiffany began, not waiting for her husband to tell the story. And this grandmother constantly complains about loneliness, asks for attention. She calls 10 times a day, comes to visit without warning, and gives unsolicited advice. What's so funny about that? I asked. Well, here's the thing. Tiffany could barely contain her laughter. Chelsea says that the old lady does all this on purpose, to get her nephew to visit her more often, and her nephew is rich. He bought her an apartment, a car, gives her money, but it's not enough for her. Can you imagine? Ryan chimed in. She lives in a great apartment, has everything she needs, but she's still unhappy. She demands attention like a little child. And you know what Chelsea said? Tiffany leaned toward me as if she were about to share some great wisdom. That older people become selfish. They think the whole world owes them, especially their relatives. Older people become selfish, especially those who have money and can use it. I listened to their story and understood. It was a parable about how ungrateful and demanding an old woman can be. A lesson for me. And Brad also told me about his aunt, Ryan continued. She saved money her whole life, lived like a pauper, and then left everything to an animal shelter. Can you imagine? Her relatives were left with nothing, and some dogs got $1 million. Wow, I feigned surprise. She probably had her reasons. What reasons? Tiffany shrugged. Just senile stubbornness. She decided to punish her family for something. Old people sometimes behave very strangely. Strange. When an old woman disposes of her money in a way that her relatives don't like, it's called strange. But when a young family spends other people's money on their whims, it's normal. But we're not like that. Tiffany reached across the table and patted my hand. We're a real family, right? We have trust and mutual understanding. Trust and mutual understanding. Beautiful words for a relationship built on financial dependence. They trust me as much as I'm willing to pay, and they understand me as long as I agree with their plans. Of course, I said. We're a family. Exactly, Tiffany rejoiced. And there should be no formalities or suspicions in a family. So, about the business plan, maybe we shouldn't complicate things. You trust us, right? That question again. They kept coming back to it like a broken record. Do I trust them? Am I willing to give money without guarantees? Do I want to be a good grandmother or a mean old woman who demands documents? You know what? I put down my cup and looked at them intently. Let's talk honestly. No beating around the bush. About what? Ryan was wary. About what you really think of me. We think you're wonderful, Tiffany said quickly. Kind, generous, caring. Stop, I interrupted her. No compliments. Honestly? What should I say? Ryan was confused. You know we love you. Do you? I smiled. Or are you just using me? There was a silence. The couple exchanged glances, and I saw fear in their eyes. Apparently, they didn't expect such directness from a submissive sponsor grandmother. What are you talking about? Ryan tried to smile. About the fact that there are only two types of people in your life, useful and useless. As long as I pay for your house, car, and entertainment, I'm useful. But when I ask for accountability for my money, I become a harmful old woman. Grandma, you're talking strangely. Tiffany laughed nervously. What accountability? We're not strangers. It's precisely because we're not strangers that you think you can be so rude, taking money and not saying thank you, making plans at my expense and getting upset when I don't agree. We always thank you, Ryan objected. For what exactly? For paying your mortgage? For buying you cars and furniture? Or for existing and having money? They were silent, not knowing how to respond. For the first time in 4 years of family relationships, I was telling them the truth to their faces. And another question, I continued. What will happen when the money runs out? When I get really sick and can't support you anymore? Will you stay with me? Of course, they exclaimed in unison. That's not true, I said calmly. You'll find 1,000 reasons to see me less often. Work, children, things to do. And then you'll remember the nursing home and say it's for my own good. Grandma, why do you think that about us? Ryan's voice sounded hurt. We're not animals. No, not animals. Just people who are used to living off others and think it's normal. Tiffany turned pale, then suddenly laughed, loudly, unnaturally. Oh, come on. She waved her hand. What are you talking about? We were just joking about Chelsea's neighbor. You're taking it too personally. Joking? I asked. Were you joking about Brad's aunt, too? What difference does it make? Tiffany got up from the table. Those were just stories. You take everything too seriously. Maybe. Or maybe I finally figured out what's going on. And what did you figure out? Ryan asked, hostility creeping into his voice. That I'm not your grandmother, but your bank. Convenient, reliable, requiring no collateral or interest. So what? Tiffany blurted out, apparently losing her composure completely. Yes, you help us. What's wrong with that? You have plenty of money and we're young. We need to earn a living. Tiff! Ryan tried to stop her, but it was too late. Come on, Tiff. She turned to her husband. I'm tired of tiptoeing around. She asked the question herself. Now let her listen. Yes, we take money from her, and we're right to do so. Is she going to take it with her to the grave? Tiffany, shut up. I won't shut up. She turned to me again. Do you think it's easy for us to communicate with you? To constantly thank you, smile, and put up with your whims? That's work too. And we do it honestly. There it is, an honest admission. Communicating with me is a job for which they get paid. All these years, they played the role of loving relatives, and I paid them for their acting skills. Whims? I asked. Yes, you're always dissatisfied. Something's always wrong. Either you're dressed inappropriately, or we're not cooking well, or something else, and we put up with it because you're our family. And another thing, Ryan chimed in, apparently deciding that since he was already spilling the beans, he might as well lay it all out. Do you know how hard it is to constantly think about you? What to buy, where to invite you, what to talk about so you don't get offended? And your hints about a nursing home, Tiffany added. Do you think we like hearing that we want to get rid of you? We care about your well-being. My well-being or yours? What's the difference? She shrugged. If you're happy in the residence and it's easier for us to visit you, everyone wins. Easier to visit, I repeated. I see. Of course. Tiffany sat back down, apparently feeling that she had let off steam and could now speak rationally. Ryan works 6 days a week, and I'm busy too. Driving across town to see you every weekend is unrealistic. Every weekend. They saw me twice a month, and not always. And if we open the salon, Ryan chimed in, we won't have any time at all. The first few years will be like working like horses. Exactly, Tiffany agreed. And at the residence, you'll be supervised, so we'll have peace of mind. And it's easier to visit, once a week for an hour, and that's it. Once a week for an hour. That's how much they're willing to spend on communicating with me once they get my money and no longer need to be constantly grateful. I see, I said, and got up from the table. Thank you for your honesty. Where are you going? Ryan asked in surprise. Home. It's late. Come on, it's still early evening. Tiffany tried to appear cordial. Stay a little longer. Let's have some tea. No, thank you. I have to go. I went to the hallway to get my purse. They followed me, clearly sensing that something had gone wrong, but not understanding what. Grandma, you're not angry, are you? Ryan asked. We just talked openly, like you wanted us to. I'm not angry, I replied, putting on my coat. On the contrary, I'm grateful for your honesty. Will you think about our plans? Tiffany persisted. About the salon and, well, about the residence? I'll definitely think about it. I went out onto the porch and they walked me to my car. Ryan gallantly opened the door and Tiffany waved goodbye. It was a typical family scene. Grandchildren seeing off their beloved grandmother after a pleasant evening. Drive safely, Ryan called out, and call me when you get there. I will. I started the car and slowly drove out of their street. In the rearview mirror, I could see them standing on the porch, waving. Perfect grandchildren who care for their elderly relative. After driving a few blocks, I stopped at a 24-hour supermarket and took out my phone. I had a few calls to make. First, to the bank to cancel the automatic mortgage payment. Then to the credit card company to block the additional card Ryan used. And finally, to the insurance company to remove them from the car insurance policy. The first call took 15 minutes. The automatic payments were canceled starting tomorrow. The second call took another 10 minutes. The card was blocked immediately. The third call had to be postponed until Monday, but that was enough. I sat in my car in the supermarket parking lot and looked at the lights of Los Angeles at night. In one evening, my life had changed. I was no longer a bank for a young family. I was once again just Deborah Clark, a 74-year-old woman who had the right to dispose of her money and her life as she saw fit. Tomorrow morning, my grandson would learn what it means to live without his grandmother's money, and I would learn what true freedom was. The morning began at 6:30 with the shrill ring of the phone. I was lying in bed, enjoying a rare feeling of complete tranquility, when the sharp sounds made me open my eyes. Ryan's name lit up on the screen. I looked at the clock. It was 6:30 a.m., too early for a polite call, too late for an emergency. It could only mean one thing. My calls to the bank yesterday had already yielded results. I didn't answer. Let them figure out the situation first, and then we'll talk. The phone went silent, but 2 minutes later, it rang again, and again, and again. I got up, went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and continued to ignore my grandson's persistent calls. By 7 in the morning, he had called 11 times. By 7:30, 18 times. I calmly ate my breakfast of oatmeal with fruit, drank my coffee, and read the morning news on the internet, while the phone continued to ring incessantly. Sometimes Ryan called, sometimes Tiffany. They were clearly taking turns trying to reach me. At 8 o'clock, I decided I had tormented them long enough and answered Ryan's next call. "Grandma, finally!" My grandson's voice sounded excited and confused. "What's going on?" "The bank sent a notification that the auto payment has been canceled. Is this some kind of mistake?" "No mistake, Ryan. I canceled the payments." "How did you cancel them? Why?" He clearly couldn't believe what he was hearing. "After our conversation yesterday, I've been thinking a lot. I've decided it's time for you to learn to be independent." "But we're not ready for such changes." Panic crept into his voice. "We don't have that kind of money. We won't be able to pay the mortgage." "That's your problem, not mine." "Grandma, you can't do that. We're family." Family. Yesterday, that word meant the right to take my money without accountability. Today, it was supposed to be the reason I would continue to support them, despite the humiliation. "I'm acting precisely as a member of the family. I'm helping you become adults." "What kind of adults?" Ryan almost shouted into the phone. "We're 31 years old. We're already adults." "Then act like adults. Work, earn money, solve your problems on your own." "What about our plans? The beauty salon?" "Your plans are your business. Take out a bank loan like all normal people do." "At what interest rate? 20% per annum?" Ryan's voice rose to a shriek. "We'll go bankrupt." "Perhaps, but then you'll understand the value of money." There was silence on the line for a few seconds. Then Ryan spoke again, more calmly, but with a hint of pleading in his voice. "Grandma, listen to me. I understand that we may have said the wrong things yesterday. Tiffany was upset and said too much. But you know we love you." "I know. You love my money." "That's not true," he tried to protest, but it sounded unconvincing. "We love you, not your money." "Then prove it. Live without my help for a year. If after a year you still call me as often, invite me to visit, and take an interest in my life, I'll believe in your love." "A year?" he gasped. "But we can't pay the mortgage out of our own pocket for a year." "Then sell the house, move to a smaller apartment. Millions of people live in rented accommodation and don't consider it a tragedy." "Sell the house?" Ryan spoke as if I had suggested he cut off his arm. "But we've put so much into it." We had. More accurately, I had, and they had enjoyed the results. But he chose to keep quiet about that little detail. "Your investment, your loss," I said harshly. "I'm not playing this game anymore." Okay, Ryan said quickly, trying to take the initiative. "What if we pay back part of the debt? Set up a payment schedule? Pay it off gradually?" "What debt? I didn't lend you anything. I just helped." Then consider it a loan. He seized on the idea. We'll pay it all back, with interest. With what money? You don't even have enough money for your mortgage. We'll find it. We'll work extra. I'll work on weekends. Tiffany will find a second job. Promises made under pressure. Words spoken in desperation and forgotten as soon as the danger passes. How many times have I heard such vows in my life? Ryan, stop. The decision has been made. But why? He almost cried. Why are you punishing us? I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just going to stop being your bank. What about the card? He suddenly asked. Is the card blocked too? Yes, but we're running out of food. We have nothing to buy food with. You have Ryan's salary and Tiffany's salary. That's enough for food. That's pennies. You can only eat bread and butter with that. Bread and butter. Millions of people around the world would be happy to have bread and butter every day. But for my grandson, who was used to restaurants and delicacies at my expense, it seemed like a disaster. Then learn to cook at home. Buy groceries at regular stores, not in the deli section. Grandma, you're crazy. Ryan's patience finally snapped. You can't treat us like this. We're your family, your only family. That's exactly why I'm doing this, so that I have a real family, not freeloaders. Freeloaders? Ryan's voice turned icy. We're freeloaders? What else would you call people who have been living off others for 4 years and think it's normal? We didn't force you to help us, he shouted. You offered. You insisted. I offered to help, not to support you for the rest of my life. What about the house now? Panic sounded in Ryan's voice. We'll be evicted. We'll be out on the street. That won't happen tomorrow. You have time to find a solution. What solution? Where are we going to get $2,500 a month? That's your problem. Work more, spend less, take out loans, do what all adults do. Loans? He laughed hysterically. What loans? We don't have the credit history for that kind of money. Then sell the house and move to a smaller apartment. We're not selling the house, Ryan shouted. This is our house, our life. Your house bought with my money, your life paid for by me. It's time to learn to live within your means. You're destroying our family, my grandson accused me. I'm not destroying it. I'm showing what it really is. Ryan slammed down the phone, and silence fell over the house. But not for long. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time it was Tiffany. Deb, what's going on? Her voice trembled with tears. Ryan says you canceled all the payments. Is that true? Yes, it is. But why? She sobbed. Because of yesterday's argument? We didn't mean to hurt you. It's not because of the argument. It's because I realized the truth about our relationship. What truth? Tiffany tried to feign sincere confusion. What you told me yesterday, that communicating with me is a job you get paid for. I said that out of anger. She cried louder. I didn't mean it. You know I talk too much when I'm nervous. People talk too much when they're nervous, but you tell the truth when you're angry. That's not true. Tiffany paused to blow her nose, then continued more calmly. Deb, listen to me. Okay, let's say I really did say something wrong, but can you punish someone so harshly for a single mistake? It's not punishment, it's liberation, for all of us. What kind of liberation? She didn't understand. Now you don't have to pretend to love me, and I don't have to pretend not to notice your hypocrisy. We're not pretending. Tiffany tried to sound indignant, but it came out weakly. We really love you. Like borrowers love a bank, as long as it gives them loans. You're being unfair. Tiffany's voice became hurt. We do so much for you. We invite you to visit. We call you. We take an interest in your affairs. Twice a month, and not always. We have work, things to do. She tried to justify herself. We can't visit you every day. Can't or don't want to. We want to. Of course we want to. We just don't have enough time. There wasn't enough time for her grandmother, but there was enough time for going to restaurants, shopping, visiting friends, and parties. It's just that everything has priorities, and I was far from being at the top of their list of priorities. Tiffany, enough. We both know how things really are. No, we don't, she cried again. You're misunderstanding everything. We appreciate you. We respect you, so much that you discuss when to put me in a nursing home. We were thinking about your safety. Tiffany tried to return to the old song. About your comfort, about their convenience, to visit once a week for an hour. So what? She suddenly got angry. What? Are we supposed to visit you every day? We have our own lives. There it was, truth instead of lies again. Their own lives, which did not include caring for an elderly relative, but did include her money. Of course you have your own lives. Live them without me. What about the house? Tiffany moved on to practical matters. What should we do with the house? I don't know. It's your house, your problem. How is it your house? You pay for it. I paid for it, past tense. But we can't do it ourselves. She cried even louder. We don't have that kind of money. Then sell it and move to something more affordable. We won't sell it, Tiffany shouted. It's our house. We've put so much into it. I put into it. You just live there. So what now? Tiffany's voice turned angry. You want to throw us out on the street? Make us live in some ghetto? Ghetto. That's what she called normal housing that matched their income. $1,000 a month apartment instead of a $2,500 house seemed like the end of the world to her. I'm not forcing you. I'm just not paying for your ambitions. Ambitions? She took offense. Is wanting to live in a decent house ambition? Wanting to live in a house you can't afford is ambition. Then you're a cruel egoist, Tiffany finally snapped. You're sitting on a pile of money and you don't want to help your family. I helped for 4 years. That's enough. 4 years? And how much did we give you? She spoke faster and faster, choking on her words. How much time did we spend making sure you didn't feel lonely? How many weekends did we spend with you instead of resting? How many weekends? Interesting arithmetic. In 4 years, they saw me maybe 100 times. 2 or 3 hours per visit. 300 hours of interaction over 4 years versus $150,000 in financial assistance. Not bad hourly pay. Consider that I've paid you for these sacrifices, I said. With interest. You're sick, Tiffany shouted. Completely sick. All you think about is money. You're the one who only thinks about money. I think about dignity. What dignity? She laughed hysterically. You're a lonely old woman who buys attention, and when you realized we could see that, you got offended. A lonely old woman who buys attention. It hurts, but it's true. That's what I've been doing for 4 years, buying the illusion of family warmth, knowing it was an illusion. Maybe, I agreed, but I won't buy it anymore. So what? Tiffany's voice became venomous. You'll sit alone in your house and talk to cats? I don't have cats. You'll get some. Everyone like you gets some. And then they die alone, and they're found a week later. Maybe, but it's better than living surrounded by people who are waiting for you to die so they can get their inheritance. We're not waiting. Tiffany tried to protest, but it sounded unconvincing. That's not true. You've already planned everything. A nursing home, weekly visits for an hour, and then a memorial service and the division of property. That's not true, she cried again, but now there was anger in her tears, not sadness. You're unfair, cruel, heartless. Maybe, but I'm honest. Goodbye, Tiffany. Wait, she cried, realizing I was about to hang up. Wait, let's talk calmly. Let's meet and discuss everything. There's nothing to discuss. Everything has already been said. But we're family. She made one last attempt. Can you just give up on your family so easily? Yes, I can, especially if it's not a family, but a one-woman show. I hung up and turned off the phone. I needed silence to digest what had happened and understand how I felt. Strangely, instead of regret or sadness, I felt relief. It was as if I had shed a heavy burden that I had been carrying for many years. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't have to think about what to buy as a gift, where to invite people, or how to please people who saw me only as a source of funding. For the first time, my money belonged only to me. I was sitting in the garden behind the house, watering the flowers with an old metal watering can, when I heard the sound of a car on the driveway. It was around 3 in the afternoon. The sun was beating down, but in the shade of a 100-year-old oak tree, it was pleasantly cool. Birds were chirping in the branches, and the voices of children playing could be heard from the neighbor's yard. It was a normal, peaceful day that was about to become less peaceful. I didn't get up from the garden chair, continuing to water the petunias. Let them come to me, not me to them. Over the past few days, I had grown accustomed to the new feeling of independence and was not going to give it up, even for the sake of propriety. The sound of footsteps on the path leading to the garden, familiar voices, first whispers, then normal speech. Ryan and Tiffany were walking toward me through the backyard, apparently having gone around the house after no one answered the front doorbell. I could hear them talking to each other, discussing something in hushed voices, preparing for the conversation ahead. Grandma? Ryan's voice sounded uncertain. He stopped a few steps away from me, holding Tiffany's hand. We tried to call you, but you didn't answer. I turned off my phone, I replied without turning to face them. I was tired of the constant calls. We were worried. Tiffany stepped forward, her voice sounding feigned concern. We thought something might have happened. At your age, anything can happen. At my age. Even now, when they came to ask for forgiveness and money, she couldn't resist reminding me of my old age. Some habits are stronger than the fear of being left without financial support. I'm fine, I said, moving the watering can to the next rose bush. As you can see, can we sit down? Ryan asked, pointing to the garden furniture under the canopy. To talk calmly? I nodded, and we moved to the table where I usually drank my morning coffee in good weather. Ryan and Tiffany sat down opposite me, while I remained standing, leaning against the back of the chair. Sitting down, they seemed like supplicants. Standing, I felt more confident. Grandma, Ryan began, folding his arms on the table and looking me straight in the eye. We came to apologize for everything we said the day before yesterday. We were wrong. What exactly were you wrong about? Well, he hesitated, clearly not expecting such a direct question. We said harsh things. We hurt you. We didn't think about your feelings. So the problem is that you told the truth, not that you think that way? No, Tiffany quickly objected. We don't think that. I told you. I blurted it out in anger. I said nonsense, nonsense. Revelations that communicating with me is work, that they dream of visiting me for an hour a week in a nursing home, that I'm a burden to them. All of that was now called nonsense, said in a fit of anger. Okay, I said. Let's say you don't think so. Then explain to me how you really feel about me. They looked at each other. The question was unexpected. In 4 years of our relationship, no one had ever talked about feelings. We discussed money, plans, purchases, but not emotions. We love you, Ryan said uncertainly. For what? What do you mean, for what? He asked in surprise. You're my grandmother, my only family. That's not a reason, it's a circumstance. Why exactly do you love me? Well, Ryan was clearly at a loss. Because you're kind, caring, you help us. I help with money? Not just money, Tiffany interjected. You always support us, give us advice, take an interest in our affairs. What advice have I given over the past year? They were silent, trying to remember. And it was understandable. I really didn't interfere in their lives, didn't give advice, didn't criticize their decisions. I learned to keep quiet so as not to create reasons for conflict. And what of our affairs are you interested in? I continued. Besides the ones that require money? All kinds, Tiffany replied vaguely. Work, plans? What's Tiffany's best friend's name? Which friend? Ryan didn't understand the question. The one she works with at the salon, the one who was getting married last month. Oh, Tiffany hesitated. Are you talking about Wendy or Crystal? I don't know. You never told me. They really didn't. Their lives were closed to me, like a door without a key. I only knew what concerned expenses and plans that required financing. They weren't interested in anything else. Why share personal information with an ATM? Did you ask? Tiffany tried to defend herself. I did. You answered in monosyllables and changed the subject. We didn't want to burden you, Ryan explained. Our problems are our problems. And my money is shared money? Well, that's different, he stammered. How is it different? You offered to help. Tiffany tried to take the initiative. We didn't ask. We didn't ask? I smiled. Who told me how hard it is for a young family without support? Who complained about high prices and low salaries? Who hinted that it would be nice to help with the down payment? We were just sharing our problems, Ryan objected. Can't you complain to your grandmother about your difficulties? You can, if you don't expect your grandmother to solve those difficulties at her own expense. They exchanged glances again. The conversation was not going according to plan. Instead of remorse and reconciliation, they were analyzing their motives and actions. Okay, said Tiffany, clearly deciding to change tactics. Let's say we weren't perfect grandchildren. But is that a reason to cut us off completely? I'm not cutting you off. I'm just no longer your sponsor. Isn't that the same thing? Ryan asked sadly. Interesting question. For him, family ties and financial support were indeed synonymous. A grandmother who didn't pay for a house and a car was no longer a grandmother. Not for me, I replied. What about you? Of course not, Tiffany hastily assured me. We're willing to keep in touch even without money. How often? How often what? How often are you willing to keep in touch with me if I don't help you financially? Well, she thought for a moment. Once a month or every 2 weeks? Once a month, instead of twice a month now. It wasn't that big a difference, but it was telling. Even in her attempt to portray a willingness to socialize selflessly, she instinctively cut back on the time. And what will we talk about during these meetings? About life, Ryan replied vaguely. How things are going, what's new? You mean small talk? Half an hour of polite conversation about nothing? Why nothing? He tried to argue. About important things. What important things? Name 3 topics that really interest you in my life. They were silent, and that silence spoke louder than any words. In 4 years of our relationship, they had never learned to see me as a person, not a function. I was a source of money, a reserve for a rainy day, insurance against life's misfortunes, but not a living person with my own thoughts, feelings, and needs. We can learn, Tiffany said quietly, if you give us a chance. You had 4 years of chances. We were young and foolish. Ryan tried to justify himself. We only thought about ourselves, but now we understand that we were wrong. What exactly do you understand? That we took advantage of you. He lowered his head. We took your help for granted. We didn't appreciate it. And what has changed? We realized our mistake. Tiffany leaned forward. We're ready to make amends. We'll be more attentive, more caring. In exchange for what? No exchange, she protested. Just because you're our family. Okay, I said. Let's say I believe in your repentance. What do you propose? The couple's faces brightened. Finally, the conversation was going in the right direction. We're ready to change everything, Ryan said quickly. We'll call more often, visit every week, and not ask for money unless it's absolutely necessary. What about the house, the mortgage? Well, he hesitated. Maybe you could reduce the payments for now? Reduce the amount, set up some kind of schedule? We'll try to find extra work, find additional sources of income. What about the beauty salon? Let's forget about the salon, Tiffany said quickly, at least for the time being. First, we'll fix our relationship, earn trust, and then we'll think about business. Same old story, just a different arrangement. They were willing to temporarily back down so they could go back to the way things were, like a drug addict who promises to quit if they get one more fix. How long will this honeymoon last? I asked. Until the next big purchase? Until the next business idea? There will be no purchases, Ryan assured me. We realize that family is more important than things. You realize that in 3 days? Sometimes one blow is enough to understand, Tiffany remarked philosophically. One blow. They really believed that cutting off their funding was a blow, not a natural consequence of their behavior. Okay, I said, and sat down across from them. Let's test your readiness for change. Question 1. How are you going to pay your mortgage in the coming months? We'll find a way, Ryan replied confidently. I'll talk to my boss about a raise. Tiffany will find a part-time job. Be more specific. Well, he hesitated. I don't know exactly yet, but we'll figure something out. Question 2. What will you do if you can't make the payments? We'll manage? Tiffany clenched her fists. We'll definitely manage. And if you can't? Then, Ryan thought, then we'll ask the bank to restructure the loan. And if the bank refuses? It won't. He tried to sound confident. We have a good credit history, which is based on my payments. But we've never been late, because I would have been late. They understood the logic of my questions. I was showing them that their plans were built on sand. Without my support, they had no real chance of maintaining the home they were accustomed to. Okay, Tiffany said, giving in. What do you suggest? Nothing. It's your life, your decisions. But you must want something from us? Ryan didn't understand. Some conditions, requirements? I only want one thing, honesty. We are honest. No, you say what a potential sponsor wants to hear. I want to know the truth. What truth? What will happen to our relationship when my money runs out? The question hung in the air. This was what they feared most, talking about what would happen next. When I grow old, when I get sick, when I am no longer useful. We'll be there for you, Ryan said quietly. No matter what happens. Until the end? Until the end. Even when I become helpless? When I need care, treatment, constant attention? Even then, Tiffany nodded, but her voice trembled. I don't believe it, I said simply. And you know why. The next 2 weeks passed in surprising calm. I turned my phone back on, but the calls from Ryan and Tiffany stopped almost completely. Only once did Tiffany send a short message asking to meet, to which I did not respond. Apparently, they realized that persuasion and pleading were not working and decided to look for other ways to solve their problems. I returned to my usual rhythm of life, which had been interrupted 4 years ago by the arrival of a young family with big needs and small incomes. Morning coffee in the garden, shopping at local stores where the salespeople knew me by name, evening walks along the quiet streets of the neighborhood. Simple joys that did not require anyone else's approval or gratitude. It was interesting to see how my spending habits had changed. Utility bills, groceries, medicine, everything I used to spend money on, plus a hefty sum that used to go toward supporting someone else's family. Now that money was left in my account, and I wondered what to do with it. Travel, home renovations, donations to charity. For the first time in years, I had a choice. Over the weekend, I met my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who was walking her little dog. We talked about the weather, prices in stores, and local news. It was a typical conversation between two elderly women, but there was a naturalness to it that I had been missing in my communication with my grandson. No one was judging anyone, begging for money, or making plans at someone else's expense. "How is your grandson?" Mrs. Chen asked. "I haven't seen him in a long time." "They're busy with their own things," I replied evasively. "Young people are like that now." My neighbor shook her head. "Always in a hurry. Work, plans, ambitions, no time left for family." If only she knew how much time my family spent planning how to spend my money. But it wasn't worth talking about. Other people's family problems rarely interest anyone. On Tuesday morning, as I was watering the flowers, the phone rang. An unfamiliar name appeared on the screen: Patricia Miller. I didn't immediately remember who she was, but then I realized she was the sister of my late husband, Frank, with whom we had had almost no contact in recent years. What could have prompted her to call me after such a long silence? "Deborah, dear." Patricia's voice sounded too cheerful for a woman who hadn't called me in 5 years. "How are you? How's your health?" "Everything's fine, Patty. How about you?" "Not bad, thanks. Listen, can I come over? I'd like to see you and talk about old times." The old days? An interesting choice of words for a woman who had ignored my calls after my brother's death and hadn't shown up at family events. But curiosity got the better of me. "Of course, come on over. I'll be home all day." "Great. I'll be there in an hour." Patricia arrived exactly an hour later, but she wasn't alone. With her was a man of about 45 with a folder of documents in his hands. Clearly not a relative. They went into the living room, where I had prepared tea and cookies. "Deborah, meet James, my financial advisor." Patricia introduced her companion. "He's a very smart man who helps me deal with complicated matters. A financial advisor in the home of a retired widow." The picture was starting to become clearer. "Why is he here?" I asked directly. "Well," Patricia hesitated. "You see, Ryan called me. He told me about your differences." Ryan had called his husband's aunt, whom he hardly ever spoke to, so the situation must be really critical if he was turning to distant relatives. "And what did he say?" "That you refused to help him with the house, that they're having financial difficulties." Patricia spoke cautiously, clearly trying to find the right tone. "The boy is very upset." A 31-year-old boy who had been living off his grandmother for 4 years and was upset when the money tap was turned off. "Everyone has financial difficulties," I remarked. "It's part of adult life." Of course," Patricia agreed. "But you know, Deborah, sometimes older people make rash decisions, especially when they live alone, think too much, and get themselves worked up." Rash decisions made by older people. Another hint that at my age, I shouldn't trust my own mind. My decision is well thought out. "But maybe it's worth weighing everything again?" James interjected, opening his folder. "I work a lot with families where similar conflicts arise. Usually the reason is misunderstanding, not real contradictions." "What are your suggestions?" I asked, curious to see which angle they would attack from. "Well, for example, you could set up a family trust," James said, taking out some papers. "This would allow you to structure the support you give your relatives, making it more transparent and controllable." A family trust. A nice name for a way to legalize supporting adult children at the expense of elderly parents. And how will it work? Very simple. Patricia perked up. You determine the amount you are willing to allocate to the family each month. The money is transferred automatically without unnecessary conversations or requests. And Ryan receives stable support and can plan his life. What about control over spending? Why control? James was surprised. If it's family support, there has to be trust. Trust. That was the word Ryan and Tiffany used to cover up their unwillingness to account for my money. What do I get in return? What do you mean? Patricia didn't understand. Peace of mind, the certainty that your family is provided for. Isn't that enough? Not for me. But you have no other heirs, James pointed out gently. Sooner or later, everything will go to Ryan anyway. Why not help him now, when he's young and really needs it? Sooner or later, everything will go to Ryan. That's the point. They came not to reconcile us, but to protect the future inheritance from the harmful whims of an old woman. What if I decide to bequeath the money to someone else? Who else? Patricia couldn't hide her surprise. You don't have any other relatives. There are charities. Charity is wonderful, James hastened to say, but you shouldn't deprive your family for the sake of strangers. Strangers. It's interesting that orphans and sick children have become strangers, but my grandson, who sees me as an ATM, remains family. Patty, I said, turning to my sister-in-law. Be honest, when was the last time you took an interest in my affairs? Well, she was taken aback. We don't talk that often. The last time you called me was 5 years ago, on Frank's birthday. We talked for 3 minutes. Time flies so fast, she tried to justify herself. It seems like it was just yesterday. In 5 years, you never once asked about my health, invited me to visit, or offered to help. And today, you came with a consultant to discuss my financial decisions. Deborah, you don't understand. Patricia became concerned. I always thought about you. I just didn't want to impose. And now you want to? Now I found out you're having problems with Ryan. She tried to feign sincere concern. As Frank's sister, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Frank's sister, who didn't come to his funeral because she was on a Caribbean cruise. The sister who never once asked how I was coping with being alone. And now she suddenly remembered her family duty. What are you suggesting? Make up. Patricia leaned toward me. Ryan's a good boy, just young. He and Tiffany don't understand the value of family yet, but they will in time. They haven't understood in 4 years. It's not enough time, James interjected. Young people mature slowly, especially nowadays when everything comes so easily. And while they're maturing, I'm supposed to support them? Not support them, help them, Patricia corrected. They're your family, your blood. My blood, which has been sucking money out of me for 4 years and calling it family relations. Patty, why don't you offer them help? You have savings too. I don't have that kind of opportunity, she replied quickly. Besides, I'm not their real grandmother. It's your responsibility. My responsibility to support adults who don't want to work for real because it's easier to live off their grandmother's money. You know what? I said, getting up from my chair. Thanks for visiting, but my decision is final. Wait! Patricia stood up too. Don't rush. Maybe we can find a compromise. What compromise? Well, partial assistance, not the full amount, but half or a third. Why? So they don't lose their home. She almost begged. Can you imagine what would happen if they were evicted? What a shame for the whole family. Shame for the family. Not because grown adults can't support themselves, but because their grandmother refused to support them. Patty, I said calmly, do you know how much money I've spent on them over the past 4 years? Well, a lot, I guess. $150,000, plus a car, furniture, gifts, about $200,000 in total. The figure made an impression. James even whistled. And how many times has Ryan said thank you over the years? Deborah, why count words of gratitude? Patricia tried to brush it off. Because gratitude is an acknowledgement that you are receiving a gift, not something you are owed. But family shouldn't count gifts, she objected. Why not? Because, well, it's family. Family members don't keep score. They don't keep score, but they don't take advantage either, I replied. And that's exactly what they did. Patricia and James exchanged glances. The conversation was not going according to their script. Okay, said the consultant, changing tactics. What do you want from Ryan? What conditions? No conditions. Let him live his life, and I'll live mine. But that's a breakup, Patricia gasped. You can't do that. I can, and I need to. What about the inheritance? James asked bluntly. Finally, an honest question. That was what worried them. Not my relationship with my grandson, but the fate of the money. That's my concern, I replied. But Ryan is counting on, Patricia began. In vain. You can't deprive him of his inheritance, she almost shouted. He's your only grandson. Your son's son. I can, and I may do so. The threat had an effect. The guests' faces became serious. That would be unfair, James said. Why? Because Ryan is not to blame for anything. He simply accepted your help and considered it his right. Don't grandchildren have the right to their grandmother's support? The consultant countered. They have the right to love. Support is a privilege that must be earned. And how could he have earned it? By being a grandson, not only when he needs money, but just because. By taking an interest in my life. By helping me, not just taking help. But he's young. Patricia tried to defend him again. He has his own life. Everyone has their own life. But family is when people share that life with each other. What if he changes? James asked. What if he realizes his mistakes and makes amends? We'll see, I said. But without my money. The guests realized they weren't getting anywhere and started to leave. Patricia remained silent, offended, while James tried to find a compromise until the very last moment. Think about it again, he said as he left. Family is the most important thing in life. I agree, I replied. That's exactly why I don't want my family to be bought with money. After they left, I sat in the garden for a long time, thinking about what had happened. Ryan had mobilized distant relatives, brought in a consultant, and tried to create a coalition against my decision. So he still didn't understand the main thing, that it wasn't about an old woman's stubbornness, but about principle. I will no longer pay for the illusion of family happiness. In the evening, the phone rang. It was Ryan again. Grandma, Aunt Patty said you're thinking of disinheriting me. Is that true? I am. But why? What did I do to you? You didn't do anything to me, Ryan. That's the problem. I don't understand. I know. That's why we've ended up in this situation. He hung up, and I continued cooking dinner. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I wanted to face it with a clear conscience. The month passed quickly and quietly. I returned to my old rhythm of life, which existed before the young family took center stage in my thoughts and plans. Morning walks in the garden, breakfast with the newspaper, trips to stores where I was known by name rather than by the size of my bank account. It was strange. The fewer people who demanded my attention and money, the fuller my life seemed. News about my grandson and his wife reached me through Mrs. Lopez, my hairdresser, whose niece worked at the same auto repair shop as Ryan. According to rumors, they were really trying to make it on their own. Ryan took on extra shifts on the weekends, and Tiffany got a second job selling cosmetics at a department store. Their efforts were sincere, but the math remained relentless. Their combined income was about $4,000 a month, while their expenses for their home, cars, and lifestyle were over $5,000. I didn't feel schadenfreude watching them struggle with reality. Rather, I was curious. Would they be able to change their priorities enough to live within their means? Would they give up expensive restaurants, designer clothes, and weekly trips to the spa? Would they learn to cook at home and buy groceries at regular stores instead of delicatessens? The answer came naturally. 6 weeks after our last conversation, I saw an ad for their house for sale. The asking price was fair, $480,000 for a property in which I had invested nearly $100,000 in mortgage payments and renovations. Simple arithmetic showed that after paying off the remaining debt to the bank, they would have about $200,000 in net profit. Not bad starting capital for beginning an independent life. I drove past their street the day after the ad appeared. The house looked well kept. The lawn was mowed, the flowers were watered, the cars were washed. They were preparing for the sale seriously, understanding that first impressions are crucial. Tiffany was busy on the porch, wiping down the front door, which I had once chosen in a store, thinking it would become a symbol of family comfort. In the yard, I noticed a real estate agency sign. It was interesting to see how quickly practical considerations overcame emotional attachment to the house. Just a month ago, Ryan was shouting that he wouldn't sell, that this was their life, their dream. Now the dream had turned into a commodity with a price tag. A few days later, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Lopez. "Deborah, dear," her voice sounded excited. "Do you know that your grandson is moving?" "I know. He's selling the house. Do you know where he's moving to?" "No," I replied honestly, and I wasn't interested. "They're renting an apartment in Long Beach, a two-bedroom. My niece says Ryan tells everyone at the auto shop that it's temporary until they get back on their feet." Long Beach, a decent neighborhood, but definitely a step down from their own house in Torrance. A two-bedroom apartment instead of a three-bedroom house with a pool. Rent instead of ownership. Reality instead of illusions paid for with someone else's money. "How are they coping?" I asked, surprised at my own interest. "Different ways." Mrs. Lopez lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Ryan seems fine, says they've learned to save money, cook at home. But his wife, well, she's used to luxury." I knew. Tiffany perceived comfort as the natural state of the world, and any restrictions as a personal insult. "But they're holding on," the hairdresser continued. "They're both working, trying hard. Maybe something will come of them. Maybe it will. Sometimes people change when they have no choice. Sometimes a crisis is the beginning of true adulthood. But more often than not, they look for a new source of funding instead of changing their habits. Time will tell which category my family falls into." On Wednesday morning, as I was reading in the garden, a car pulled up. An old Honda, clearly not a new purchase. Ryan got out, looking older, tired, but with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Determination. Or just stubbornness. He walked slowly down the path, as if thinking through every word of the conversation to come. He stopped a few steps away from me without sitting down or approaching. "Grandma," he said simply, "we sold the house. I saw the listing. We're moving on Saturday, to Long Beach. Good luck." "Thanks." He paused, looking at the flowers I was watering. "I wanted to say, you were right. We really did take advantage of you." The confession I had been waiting for 4 years. But now that it had been said, I felt no triumph, only fatigue from the time lost. "I know. And also," he paused, searching for words, "I'm sorry. For everything." "For what exactly?" "For taking your kindness for granted. For not seeing you as a person. For thinking only about money." The words were right, but too late. Like medicine given to a dying patient. "What do you see now?" I asked. "Honestly?" He smiled. "I don't know yet. I need time to figure myself out. To understand who I am without your money." An honest answer. The first honest answer in all the years of our relationship. How much time do you need? I don't know. Maybe a year, maybe more. Ryan looked at me. Will you wait? Why? To give me a chance to become a real grandson. A real grandson. A beautiful concept, but what does it mean in practice? Phone calls that aren't about money? Visits without requests for help? Interest in my life, not my bank account. Ryan, I said calmly, I'm not going to wait for you, and I'm not going to check to see if you've changed. Why? Because I'm 74 years old. I don't have time to experiment with someone else's conscience. What if I really do change? Then you'll find a way to show it, without my control and evaluation. He nodded as if he had expected that answer. What about the inheritance? He asked quietly. What? The inheritance? Are you really going to take it away from me? I'm going to live the way I think is right. What happens after I die? Time will tell. So, you haven't decided yet? I have, but I'm not telling you what. Ryan understood. The conversation was over. He turned toward the door but then stopped. Can I ask you a question? He said without turning around. Yes. Did you ever love us? Really love us? The question caught me off guard. I thought long and hard about my answer. I did, I finally said. But not you, what you could have become. I see, he nodded. Goodbye, Grandma. Goodbye, Ryan. The car drove away, and I continued watering the flowers. An ordinary day, ordinary things. No drama, no tears, no vows of eternal love. Just two people who told each other the truth and went their separate ways. In the evening, I sat on the porch, sipping wine and listening to the sounds of the city falling asleep. Neighbors were having dinner in their yards. Children were playing in the street. Music was playing somewhere in the distance. Life went on as it always had, with its dramas and joys, meetings and partings. I thought about the past years, about the money spent on other people's dreams, about the time wasted on illusions of family happiness. Did I regret my decision? No. Did I regret the lost relationship? No, not that either. That relationship was not worth regretting because it was built on lies. Maybe Ryan will really change. Maybe he will learn to be a grandson not only by blood, but also in spirit. Maybe he will understand the difference between family and business. Or maybe he'll find a new source of funding and forget about our lessons. In any case, it will be his choice and his responsibility. I made my choice to remain a person, not a bank. To remain myself, not a function in someone else's life. Tomorrow is a new day, and I will meet it free from the expectations and demands of others. At 74, I finally regained the right to be simply Deborah Clark, a woman who lives for herself and is responsible only for her own decisions, and it was a wonderful feeling.